Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. I'm back for part 2 of working on my cedar avatar grove. So today I'm going to finish pruning up the trees, doing kind of a detailed branch pruning to them, and then I'll start working on cleaning up the landscape and removing some of the lichen from the trees. And then at the end I'll step back and evaluate all the trees. I'll have to see if some of the trees need to be reduced in height, maybe some branches killed off in the apex of the main tree. So kind of a step back to look at the forest and see how it's progressing and where I want it to go in the future. Here is a look at the forest. I've got some sunshine on it, and when you rotate it you can see all the cool shadows. I'm really glad that I stopped the work on the forest yesterday, took a break and came back the next day. It kind of gives you fresh eyes on the forest, and I didn't want to rush it, trying to get it all done in one day. I think that's one of the pluses of having bonsai as a hobby, is that you can work on trees over multiple days and you don't have to be in a rush to get everything finished. So I'll continue working, pruning up the trees, and then we'll come back for the next step, which I think will be cleaning up the moss from the base of the trees and scrubbing the lichen off the trunks. Having lichen on your trunks, it makes the trees look old, but you can have too much lichen where it's obscuring the bark. You can also see a lot of bark is peeling off naturally, and that happens on these cedars as they grow, is that strips of bark kind of flake off. Sometimes in nature you can see cedars, all the strips of bark will be lying on the ground underneath the tree, where the tree just naturally strips the older bark off. It gets flaky and falls off, and it's always constantly being renewed as the tree grows. I'll continue pruning up the trees, looking at all the branch structure and pruning them up the best I can. Kind of, creating a better branch structure. You can see on some of the supporting trees here that they're getting quite dense, and that will continue to evolve, so eventually it'll match the density of the main tree. All these younger trees around here were either grown from seed cuttings or some were collected when I dug up a larger tree. Sometimes you get little seedlings at the base growing up, so I separated them. So yeah, all these trees around here are very, very young. They're only, less than 10 years old. But they will slowly develop into something nice. It will take me quite a while. I'll work away all morning and maybe into the afternoon pruning up all the surrounding trees. I have been working away, pruning up all the trees in the forest. There's still a lot of branches that need sorting out, but some of them are getting there. Some of the trees are getting quite full. This one's looking good. That one's looking pretty good. Yeah, they're starting to get some density and some nice branches on them. Takes a long time to prune them all up. There's a lot of trees in this forest, and there's a lot of branches that aren't going very good directions yet, but that's for the future. I've done as much as I can to them. The trees around the back are starting to straighten up. You can see it's still on a bit of an angle, but it's starting to get back to its original position. Yeah, they were all bent down from the snow. Yeah, so you can see it's getting a nice wall of foliage at the back of the planting. It's not, 100% filled in yet, but that's my goal, is that when you look at the forest from the front, that there's kind of a backdrop of green, that it looks like the forest goes on forever. So next, I've got to clean it all up. I've got clippings everywhere. So I'll do that, and then I'll start clearing away the moss around the base of the trees. I'm going to start cleaning up the moss now. So I'll pick it off the trunk and the root base, which you can't see much of at the moment. And expose the roots. There's a hole in the trunk here where a root was removed a long time ago. It kind of gives the tree a bit of character. And I'll have to get my toothbrush and kind of brush down the roots, getting all the lichen and moss off of them. The root base is important on these big old trees. It gives them a look of stability and age. And I'll get my toothbrush. Just do a bit of scrubbing. These trunks turn quite red when they're cleaned up. They kind of almost look like redwood trees. You can see some of the loose plates of bark that'll come off. And it'll quickly turn gray again. And this happens every year. It peels its bark back. There's a lot of moss growing up the trunk here. That bark's just coming off. Even if you don't strip the bark, it just flakes off. It just gets to a certain point where a big sheet of it comes off. The moss is definitely grown in, but it's not too thick because it's kind of shaded out by the forest all the time, so it doesn't grow with a lot of vigor. If it was in the sun, it would thicken up really quickly, but it's not to the point where I have to strip it off or anything. So you can start to see the root base a bit more. Definitely makes the tree look more stable when you see those surface roots. Yeah, it really helps make the tree look really old, showing off those surface roots. Gives it an old growth look, planted feeling. Now I still have a lot around the back of the tree that I've got to get to. So I'll spin it around a bit. Start working back here. It's always a good idea to clear away a little more moss than you want because it quickly fills in again. Behind the trunk here, there's a lot of big loose plates of bark that I'm taking out. You can see that. It's just ready to fall off. So I'm taking it off. Take a lot of that lichen with it. So one of the reasons I'm stripping the bark off is if you have that loose bark on the trunk and then you decide to put it in a show and then it decides to flake off, you get this change of color. So it's better to get rid of that loose flaky bark now. Clean the trunk up so it's all a uniform look. Because there'll be more lichen in that'll grow in on this bark as it ages. So I'll wet down the trunk first, give it a spray. And then I can start scrubbing. See, there's more bark flaking off. So you can see how red that trunk is now. That doesn't last long. In a few days it'll change back to that kind of grayish color. This water I'm using has a bit of soap in it, not much, it's just very dilute mixture. I'll start scrubbing the branches now and the upper part of the trunk. Cleaning off my newly killed off branch here. I'm cleaning the upper structure now, all these branches in the apex. Yeah, that lichen was really, really thick. Way too thick. So you've just got to be careful of any deadwood branches you have. They'll be very brittle. So when you're scrubbing with the toothbrush, just stay away from those branches. Otherwise they could break off. There's a lot of loose flaky bark in the upper part too that I've got to get out. It can also harbor insects, any loose flaky bark you have. I am getting there. I've got most of the lichen removed. I'm just doing a bit of areas I've missed in some of these hard to get places. But most of it's gone now. I've got all the lichen scrubbed off the tree now, so I'll give it a final rinse. My spray bottle's just barely working here. Might be time for a new one. So this is soapy water, and I'll rinse it. I'll refill it with rainwater and give the final rinse. Or maybe I can just use the watering can. And I think that's done. Alright, I'll use the watering can and rinse the tree off. So here I go. So once this dries, it won't look quite as red. That should be good. Here is a look at the trunk now, and you can see how vivid that red color can be. It's quite amazing. I'll show you what it looks like once it's dry. It's much less red looking, and then it quickly goes to that gray color once the sun hits it. Yeah, so there's the root base down here. Looking good. And the upper structure, all looking nice and clean of lichen. So now I have all the other trees to do. You can see how thick the lichen is on that tree. This one's starting to get some thick lichen on it. This one's green. And all the others. So I have a lot of scrubbing to do. So I'll refill my spray bottle and get to work. And we'll come back and have a look at the forest once all the lichen is removed. Okay, trunk number 2. Some good red color on this one. Yeah, where this bark strips off, it sure turns a bright red. Especially on these older trees, it seems to really bring out the red color in them. The younger ones don't really have the nice bark on them yet. Or it's not stripping back far enough, I guess, when you scrub it. So hopefully, by the time, if this forest ever goes in a show again, the lichen will grow back in, the trunks will be a gray color, and it'll look natural once again. I just didn't want to leave all that lichen on the trees because it was getting way too thick. I'm sure it can stop back budding. If it coats the branch, it wouldn't get any light or little light. Yeah, these little trees are a little harder to get into. I might need to use like a little bottle cleaner or something to scrub all the branches and that. I think since I brought this in from outside, the foliage has turned a little greener too.
Maybe it's just my imagination, but I think it has. I think it's greened up a bit. And it's not very warm in the greenhouse here. It's only 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but might be enough to kind of reactivate the tree a bit. Some of these trees don't have any lichen at all, like this outer one. I haven't touched that, and it's perfectly clean of lichen. You'll notice in this forest that every tree is different. There's straight ones, there's ones with crooked trunks, some with extremely crooked trunks. The foliage is different on each one, and I think it makes a nice forest. You'll see a lot of forests where every tree is the same style and maybe just a difference in size. And it's kind of boring looking because, you know, every tree is exactly the same. It's just a different size. But in this forest, every tree is different. And I like that. I think it makes it look very natural and interesting. You can see on this tree how much lichen is in amongst the apex and the branches here. So that needs to be cleaned off for sure. Some of the trees are quite good, but some are very heavy with lichen. So yeah, I have a lot more cleanup to go on the trees. Keep working at it. I finished cleaning the lichen off the trunks of the trees. Yeah, it sure changes the look of the forest. I think it looks more realistic. Maybe, I don't know. So I really enjoy working on this forest. I think I'll be sad when it's finished, because I'm really enjoying myself out here, scrubbing lichen off the branches, pruning it up, cleaning it up. So I still have a lot of work to go. There's definitely going to be a part 3 to this series. I still have to clean up the moss. You can see at the base of all these trees, you can't see any of the root base. And I have rocks in here that you can just barely see. There's one up here that's almost totally covered. And I think there's one up here that you can't even see. It's just covered in moss. So I have a lot of landscape work to clean up also. When I was going around cleaning up the lichen off the branches, I found some more that needed pruning. And I find that with forests that, you know, every time you look at the tree, you see something else that you missed the first time. So it's a good idea to go over your forest several times. And you can see this tree at the back is starting to get a little more vertical still. And I think they're definitely greening up. I don't think it's my imagination. So I think the next step for me is to clean up the moss around the base of all the trees. I did it on the main tree already, but I think I've got to do it around all the other trees. So that will also take quite a while, but it'll be nice kind of exposing the root base on each tree. So again, I'll just come in with the tweezers and pull the moss away from the base of each tree. And I'll have to do the rocks also. It's a lot of moss that's grown up around the rocks. And I want to keep some of it. I want it to look natural. And you'll find with these forests that over time the roots kind of grow across and follow the terrain. So someday a lot of this forest floor will be covered in roots, and that looks awesome on a forest. You can tell it's an old mature forest when there's all these roots following the terrain up the hills and valleys, and yeah, it looks really mature when you get to that stage. So hopefully someday I'll see that. I'll get my toothbrush out and just scrub around the base of the tree. Yeah, so that's getting some nice radial roots flaring out on it. I'll do this tree next. So some of the trees in the forest, the trunk went quite red when I scrubbed the bark and the trunk. Other ones didn't change too much.
I guess the bark just wasn't ready to shed on them yet. A lot of these trees at the back of the forest I started from seed. So they're quite young trees, you know, they're probably, I don't know when I put them in there, I think 4 or 5 years ago maybe. Maybe not even that long. So yeah, these trees have a long way to go before they start looking like mature trees. You know, maybe some people would think some of these twisty trees don't belong in the forest. But, as I said, I like the variety of different trees. If they all look the same, you see one tree, you've seen them all. This one, you can look at each tree. And I've tried to plant them in a logical location. Some of the ones with bent trunks at the base I have growing out of cracks in rocks, and yeah, kind of justify the curves in them. Here's an example of using kind of strange material for a forest. So you can see at the base of this tree how it comes out of the ground on an angle, and then the tree grows straight up. And this one also over here, you can see how it comes out at the angle, and then the tree grows vertical. So if you have like a really unusual tree, there's always a spot in a forest that it looks perfectly natural, and I really like these trees doing that. It just looks like I've seen that in nature, and yeah, it's a very natural look and a good solution for an unusual looking root base on a tree. I talked about roots following the terrain. So there's an example of a root kind of growing around that rock, kind of hugging the surface of the soil. So as that thickens up and matures, it'll look better and better over time. I'll continue to work away clearing out the moss from around the base of the trees, and then we'll come back and have another look at the forest. I've been working away and the light is starting to fade. So here's what the forest looks like. The trunks are drying and they're looking much more natural. You can see the color of them now. My gin root base is still wet. I'm clearing the moss around all the trunks, still working on that. Exposing rocks. I found a rock here. There's a rock back here. Yeah, a lot of work to go. But I'm enjoying it. It's really, really fun, and the forest is looking quite good, I think. The forest made a lot of progress today, but I still have more work to go on it, so I'll continue the series in part 3. So I'll see everyone tomorrow.